Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the third list for List Week 2025, my picks for the 11 worst albums that came out last year. A year where a lot of the worsts came from places that you see all the time in music, older bands trying to bounce back, newer artists trying to follow up long anticipated releases, pop stars continuing trying to ride waves and crashing in glorious splendor. It's just a lot of the same menagerie you've heard me talk about in a grander sense, but with some usual suspects and some newer faces. Leave it a like if you're excited, and let's go ahead and dive on in.
Yeah, tell me what you say. So we raise hands up high in the sky.
Could just be a case of it being a cocktail I just don't like the taste of, but Rise Against's blend of softening and reinforcing their edges where they choose to, with the production style that's seen on here, just was not my bag this time. I really didn't think that they would take such a step down from their last era, considering that just felt like a really, not plateau-esque, but very just a by-the-numbers release for the band. I appreciate them wanting to maybe experiment and deviate out. I just don't think that this does so in any avenues that benefit their strengths as a unit. I don't think that the aggressive moments translate as well as even some of the aggressive moments on that last era, or very much show the album before. I think the moments where they try to juxtapose that with something else, again, just it doesn't taste well for me. It just leaves a very sour taste in my mouth. I don't think I'll be picking this album up ever again unless it's to do a look back on Rise Against discography, but spoiler on that, if I ever rank their discography, this would not rank high amongst those ranks.
It's like, oh shit, here we go again. Another night out here with all my friends.
I would have never necessarily felt A Day to Remember were mislabeled, being adjacent to like frat style pop punk. Very much the snotty side of the genre is less a point of this. But on this newest album, a big ol' album, Volume 1, that feels very much more so the MO, with some of the production styles and some of the vibes sounding like 30-somethings reminiscing on their college days. It is not the vibe that I like necessarily, but I'll give it this. It is definitely better than their last album. Some of the songwriting I still think is kind of cringe. Some of the production I think is a bit much, and I think that it equally also has moments where it's not enough when it comes to setting a bigger stage that it's trying to build towards. Sure, it's better, but not by much, and again, it's not saying much by saying it's better than their last one.
I thought I'd never make riches. Got the system against me and it's way vicious. Sometimes
Hip-hop had a lot of vets coming back and showcasing that they could do another victory lap, while other rappers that have still been going this whole time were showing that they have been out of steam for years now. While I think Tech N9ne has had a couple of splashes over the last couple of years that I think have been okay, it's still been a bountiful amount of oversaturation. It's still been a discography that remains oversaturated, and 58164 sees Tech getting reflective in ways that I just don't think are interesting, and also just get really fucking cringe. The skits on here, not my bag. I think it's cool to see him reflect on like his first job in his early years. That feels very in service to parts of this record, and his dips with reflecting on the racism he's encountered very directly, I think leads to an interesting through line throughout parts of the record. But I think that like there's just avenues this record goes in that it goes a little too deep on in some regard. It also runs the typical idiosyncratic circles that Tech has, where he just sometimes writes songs that I don't think the subject is all that interesting. This is just one of those releases where there's more of that than not.
On an island in the sun, we'll be playing and having fun.
easily the worst album to have the Carter attached to it in this anthology that Lil Wayne's pulled together. And similarly to some of the aspects of the Carter records over the last couple, he gets reflective on his career, but this album just feels like a family album you don't open much, for maybe a good reason, because this touches on eras of Wayne's career and gets nostalgic for eras that I am not a fan of, and seeing him wax nostalgic and re-embrace some of those vibes I don't think works well for him. There's some stuff here that works, because Lil Wayne is a master at making some stuff stick when throwing everything, including the kitchen sink at the wall, but this is just an example of his hit ratio just not being the most consistent. It's definitely got some lows that rival some of the biggest lows in his career, IMO, and not juxtaposed with anything that I would think sits close to anywhere near his highest of highs. It's got some good moments, but nothing that I would say stands above anything on the other Carters especially.
Roll another blunt and I make motherfucking fame. Spin on the block, have a pussy nigga stay.
I'll give this Cardi album this. It at least has a song that ended up on my top 50 singles of the year list because it's really not that bad, and Backdoor. And there's other songs on here that I don't think are that bad, but this album is very much a hodgepodge of quasi-nonsense that was a bit overhyped and a bit overwrought in like that hype lasting out to this eventual release. It feels like a floundering out in the biggest splendor that I think culminated to a record that, similarly to records like the Carter 6, sure have some stuff that works, and Cardi, as far as like branching out in his comfort zone, I think he does so in some solid moments here, but there's also some avenues sonically and inspiration-wise that I don't think he wears well, and I think showcase some of Cardi's more ugly side in a way that I don't think suits him well. It ultimately feels like that passion project that took too long to come out, but in all the worst ways, and I think that's the worst thing about it. It almost was a Redacted that I did last year in the terms of highlighting 2025 records, and I still might someday. Let me know in the comments if that's something you're interested in. But I think that this record, similarly to the Cardi B record, the one that ended up the Redacted for looking back on 2025, I think was just a bit too much.
Is it Becky? Is it Keisha? Is it Ed?
If there was one word I can use to describe Drake on this album, and really how he sounds with what he's been pushing with this Iceman project, I think that he just sounds tired. He sounds like a guy who's stayed at the party too long and is almost afraid to leave because of what the world looks like on the other side. He really feels like he's trying to keep the vibe from 2018 alive. This would have done numbers back then, higher numbers than it did this year, which it still showed that like this sound has legs considering some of the successes it saw. I did hear Nokia throughout pockets of the radio this year, and I mean, it's not the worst Drake single I've hated hearing worse songs from him, but it's also far from my favorite. And that's ultimately how I felt about this record. It sounds tangential to a Drake project on top of that sonically, considering this is a collaborative record. Sure, it feels like in his world, considering Party Next Door is somebody with OVO and in his circle, but like it doesn't sound like he is the star. It feels like he's trying to hide from the spotlight. Something that feels like the case with how he's been teasing this Iceman project. It very much enhances that idea of man who's afraid to let the party stop. But I gotta tell you, man, I left this album in the review and did not regret doing so. Nothing that I would say has quality moments in this is better than any of the ideas that Drake has done in this avenue prior to this. It is very much ran dry in the worst sense, the sonic palette and atmosphere of this.
So stick to me like yeah.
There's one scene rising in metal music that I have not been fully sold on, and Sleep Token I feel like are the sort of poster children for that rising scene, and that's something I'm dubbing a non-metal. bands that very much expand on the roots scene in bands like Slipknot and Kiss of anonymity in your music, but going the step further by having this very processed vibe to that to further hide behind the guise of your sounds. And I just don't like anything I've heard from this scene. You know, President, what samples I've heard of their stuff, I don't really dig. And every time I sit down with Sleep Token, I don't fuck with their music. Like, I get their vibe, I get what they're going for, because I see the slices of what modern metal is doing throughout the roots of this, both in the sensual music stuff, the, like, sex metal that people really try to lump them in the scenes of, but also just the veins of where their production goes, both in the ambient softness and the heaviness. I just don't think that the cocktail that they're cooking in this sounds good to me. I just don't like the anonimetal stuff and how they approach it. I gave this album a chance, like I said in my review, because it was asked of me from a friend that I do, like seeing the opinion of and bouncing opinions off of. But this is just another example of just, I don't dig the vibe of this band. I don't dig their lyrical palette or their sonics. And while I think it's interesting to see a scene that I've loved for most of my life start to really lean into avenues that I just absolutely have an aversion to even more intensely, it's interesting to watch grow. While Life of a Showgirl is landing lower on its proverbial year-end list than Tortured Poets Department was on its proverbial year-end list, I still do like her wild gamut of pastiches she's trying to do on here that all feel like they're trying to play into the pop world, even if it's done so flatly and feels like it's underutilizing its production team more so than the drab, overwrought dramatics of Tortured Poets Department. I think this album is dumb in ways that I think it very much misses the point, while also being dumb in a very cringe sort of way. It is all the worst attributes of where Taylor Swift songwriting has evolved in its ugliest forms. It is petty in the dumbest of ways. It is horny in the dumbest of ways. It is romantic in the dumbest of ways. It feels like a record that is misinformed, and I just really, really hate it. It's like a worst version of a record that I didn't think I would exist, and that's why it's here. And I mean, it's so bad. It has been a disappointment to some people in the Taylor Swift fandom. That's how much of a disappointment it is. But it is very much aproposly so. This album is hot ass. These bottom three, though, you could make an argument being the worst of what they bring to the table in their respective fields and music. Unatoned is the watered-down version of the already surface-level Machine Head sound. It is derivative of all of the aspects they've done time and time again throughout the last, almost 20 years. It is a band that I used to really enjoy showing back up to the party, completely unchanged, including, their jackets. They smell at this point with how unchanged everything on display is. Its use of dramatics feels like it's aiming for the same rafters, though, and really kind of feels like it's hitting a much lower ceiling. So it just feels like the band trying to live that life while not feeling at all that sustainable. I really don't think I'll ever spin another Machine Head record again. I honestly hate that I gave this the time of day, because it is that fucking bad.
Won't stop, my still hot even though I won't get nominated. Personal life with my wife, mind your business is complicated.
This album really feels like it's trying to build a platform to hold up nothing. It's got these big ideas and big sounds and clean production to back Will's sleek rhymes, where he teases some depth, but never really gets anywhere with it. And a lot of the hooks on here are also amongst some of the worst, which for a guy who, used to have, and maybe it's just because he didn't have some of the same ghostwriters, but used to have some pretty solid, at least hooks behind him, isn't bringing any of that to the table based on a true story. And for a story that's supposed to have something based on it, There's not much going on in that story, if I'm being frank. Not my name, but if I'm being frank, based on a true story, about as surface level as the last album I just took a shit on.
Once you know what my love's gonna feel like, nothing else will feel right.
Maybe it's recency bias, because I did just take a shit on this album in the last listening log, but I told myself if I was going to do one album to catch up in December that could be on the worst list, I was going to make it count. And I feel like I really did, because American Heart is easily, like when it comes to albums that circulated throughout the charts, was my least favorite to encounter. I don't fucking enjoy the sonics on this album at all. I dig when bands try to reignite and reinvigorate that Heartland rock vibe, but the production on this does so in ways that, while complimentary to Benson Boone, don't work for me when translating and modernizing this sound. And I don't think Benson Boone's voice is all that good. Yeah, sure, it's catchy, but it's not catchy in ways that I like having stuck in my head. Easily my least favorite album of the year, if only because it actively made me upset because of how prominent it was, even when I wasn't subjecting myself to it. That was my list. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know your picks for the worst albums that you heard last year. If you like this, again, make sure you give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. Later today, I will have my best albums of the year list that I hope you're equally, if not more, excited for. But I'm going to go up and fire rack. You guys are going to do these types of situations, and I'll see you another day.